Penn State fascinates me on defense because they lose Manny Diaz. But Manny Diaz, I don't think, was the same caliber of defensive coordinator. Perhaps I'm still wrong on this, but given what he did against Michigan, some of what he did against Ohio State last year, and especially that Indiana game where Indiana just had this weird flukish performance where they were very successful against Penn State in the passing game department. Brennan Sorsby at one point was averaging nearly 20 yards per pass attempt. It was insane. He wasn't the same caliber of DC as Phil Parker, as Jesse Minner, as Jim Knowles, not the same as Glenn Schumann or many other defensive coordinators around the country, like Brent Venables at Clemson, for example, when he was at Clemson, not at Oklahoma. But Oklahoma, they barely missed this list, but I want to get back on topic. Penn State brought in Tom Allen. They did. Tom Allen had some success on defense at Indiana, both as the defensive coordinator, more importantly as the head coach, when in 2020 they had a top 25 defense. And in 21 and 22, they had talent on defense. The offense was just so bad that it could never be utilized. And unlike Iowa, they did not have the coaching or depth to compensate for that. Part of that was because they were in the Big Ten East and got beaten up by Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State throughout the season. This defense is strong. And last year, again, this is what I hate about the opt-outs in bowl games. This defense may have been better than Iowa's, than Ohio State's, than Clemson's. It's just they got gashed in the Peach Bowl because Manny Diaz wasn't there, because Chop Robinson opted out. I know that their corners, Caitlin King and Johnny Dixon, opted out. And I think they had some other opt-outs too. They were playing Cam Miller and then like a true freshman at starting corner against Trey Harris and Caden Precorn and Jackson Dart. That's suicide. You're not going to use your defense to win a game with that setup. You're just not. Even factoring that in, they were fourth in offensive points allowed per game, 13.8 points per game allowed, 0.216 points per play allowed. That was fourth nationally. They only allowed 256.6 yards per game, which was third nationally. They were second in opponent yards per play, ahead of Ohio State, ahead of Michigan, only allowing 4 yards per play, only behind Iowa. And they were 11th, leading all of these teams that we've talked about in takeaways per game, especially in regards to fumbles, because they'd always get to the quarterback. Penn State's weakness, this is fascinating, was pass defense. Now, what are you telling me, Sam? They only allowed 181.6 yards per game, and they only allowed 6.1 yards per pass attempt. Those are great numbers. Well, that is true. That is true, but they allowed 11.3 yards per completion, and the only reason Penn State didn't allow more passing yards per game was because they would get to the quarterback so fast. Look what happened at Michigan. Look what happened against Iowa. Look what happened even against Ohio State. Ohio State's passing offense, despite having a huge matchup advantage with Ohio State's receivers being much better, especially Marvin Harrison Jr., than Penn State's corners, Penn State had an elite pass rush. It was the best pass rush in college football last year. And if you could not get outside leverage, especially in the ground game, you were toast. You were not going to have success against that defense without allowing Penn State's offense and James Franklin to shoot itself with a shotgun in the foot while wearing flip-flops, which is what Penn State's offense was last year. It was very unserious. That was their weakness, was their secondary. And their secondary was not bad by any stretch of the imagination. And if not for what was probably a very off game against Indiana and a ton of opt-outs against Ole Miss, it would be probably looked upon as a top 10, maybe top 5 secondary last year. You had Caitlin King. You had Kevin Winston Jr., who comes back. Jalen Reed, you had him. Zakee Wheatley was in the rotation. All of these players, safety is their natural position. They'll be starting in the secondary this year. A.J. Harris comes in from Georgia. He'll be starting at right corner. Cam Miller starting at left corner. Again, these are projections, but with fall camp underway and what we know from many of these players' careers in previous seasons, we can pretty accurately gauge who the starters will be. There are plenty of players back and Penn State returned 68% of their production on defense from 2023. Pretty good numbers. Top 40 in returning production, a top 10 in all the statistics I listed except for turnovers, which they were just one spot outside of the top 10. Their rushing defense last year was insane. If it weren't sack adjusted, they'd probably be behind Michigan, UCLA, and some of these other schools that didn't get to the quarterback as efficiently, as proven by the Michigan game, at times against Ohio State, and then also against Ole Miss, though again I think more of that was due to the opt-outs than Penn State just having a problem there. Michigan especially proved that with a stacked offensive line and with commitment to the ground game, especially with outside leverage and taking advantage of Penn State's scheme of playing tight technique and loving to blitz inside and getting pressure there. Penn State's defensive tackles, for example, were better at pass rush than stopping the run. They were awesome at both, but particularly their defensive tackles were for a long time built more like defensive ends until last year when they put a little more muscle on, got more experienced, and were still great at rushing the passer. And this year, many of their defensive tackles, like 3 out of their 5 that have been in the rotation, are over 300 pounds. They have experience there. This defensive line, we talk about Michigan, we talk about Ohio State. What if Penn State has the best defensive line in all of college football? It's very possible. They only allowed 75 rushing yards per game last year, and I know this is sack adjusted, but still, you typically don't lose a ton of yards on sacks. Teams only average 2.2 yards per carry on Penn State. The only team that ran on Penn State successfully when their defense wasn't just, plagued with opt-outs and Manny Diaz leaving the program, only Michigan could successfully run on them. No one else could. West Virginia, a little bit. Ohio State also probably would have been a little bit if Henderson played in that game. That was it. The best players on this defense are Abdul Carter at defensive end. I think Donnie Dennis Sutton will have a breakout year at defensive end. And then you have linebacker Kobe King and Kevin Winston Jr., strong safety. Kevin Winston Jr. had 61 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 5 passes defended, and an interception. Abdul Carter and Donnie Dennis Sutton combined for 8 sacks, for 11.5 tackles for loss, and I think 2 or 3 forced fumbles last season. I highlighted Donnie Dennis Sutton there because, well, he had 2 of them, and also you only have limited space when editing for these templates. But Abdul Carter was a linebacker last year. I think that he will do extremely well as a pass rush. Now at defensive end, that's the position Penn State originally wanted him to play at. He declined, and then he was open to it after 2023. Kobe King, who's projected to start at middle linebacker, he had 59 total tackles last year, 6 TFLs, 1.5 sacks. Tony Roas is a true freshman, played in nearly every game for Penn State last year. He's projected to start at weak side linebacker, and he'll do well there. He's a breakout player for me as well, and definitely an all Big Ten caliber linebacker, and consequentially one of the best linebackers in all of college football. Tom Allen is a legit unit this year, and they start off playing at West Virginia, but West Virginia loses some players on their offense, and their offense was not the strength of their team last year. This defense will have several games to figure something out, given that there probably will be some changes from Diaz to Allen and some of the departures that they've had. But then again, I imagine that Tom Allen will keep things pretty similarly, and the transition from Diaz to Allen will probably be similar to the one from Minter to Martindale at Michigan. Penn State's defense should reload. In fact, this could be college football's best defense, and people might cringe at that a little bit because Penn State, while having awesome defenses under Brent Pry and especially under Manny Diaz last year, they were never quite at that number 1 caliber. Brent Pry never had the nation's best defense, though he was close a few times. And Manny Diaz's unit last year at some point, looked like they could contend for that. But after the Michigan game in particular, that was evident that they did have enough weak links compared to Michigan and even Iowa and Ohio State, especially by the very end of the season, that you knew they were probably not the best defense in the country. But this year, with how much they bring back, again, nearly 70% of their production from the prior year, that's a lot. Those are Ohio State numbers, and they're above Ohio State in that category, I do believe. So pay attention. Thank you for watching this cut of Touchdown Talk. Remember to like the video to help this channel get into the algorithm and grow as we approach the 2024 season. And also subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can participate in our giveaway at 20,000 subscribers. Help us to grow, join this awesome community, and also be notified when we release new content here on College Football with Sam. I would like to thank my Patreon members for sponsoring this video and channel. A shout out to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal for being $25 a month Heisman members. A shout out to $10 a month American members, all American members, Chris Lane, Connor Little OH, and Ismar. And a shout out to $5 all conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell. Have a great day, guys, and we will see you soon. Bye.